The forest stood oppressive, a wall of ancient trees. Twisted branches clawed at the fading light. Shadows stretched, long and hungry, across the forest floor. The air hung heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. It whispered secrets, none meant for human ears. This was no place for a man and his dog, yet here they were, swallowed whole by the wood's eerie embrace. The path, barely visible, beckoned them deeper into the gloom. Each step forward felt like a step closer to oblivion. The forest held its breath, waiting. Daniel clutched his dog's worn leather leash tighter. "Easy, boy," he muttered, his voice a hushed sound in the stillness. Sam, a scruffy terrier mix, whined softly, pressing closer to Daniel's leg. His usually bright eyes were clouded with unease, his tail tucked low. They were alone, utterly alone. The last rays of sun had vanished, swallowed by the dense canopy above. The darkness felt alive, pulsating with unseen energy. Daniel shivered, pulling his thin jacket tighter around him. He shouldn't have lingered so long, let the daylight fade. A low growl rumbled deep in Sam's chest, a sound that seemed to resonate with the very essence of the forest around them. The darkness was thick, almost tangible, wrapping around them like a suffocating blanket. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a reminder of the life and death that coexisted in this ancient place. Daniel tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the small hunting knife at his belt. His fingers brushed against the cool metal, a small comfort in the overwhelming darkness. He had always prided himself on being prepared for anything, but this was different. This was something he couldn't have anticipated. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, his voice tight with apprehension. The words seemed to hang in the air, swallowed by the oppressive silence. Sam's ears twitched, his eyes never leaving the shadows ahead. Daniel could feel the tension in his own body mirrored in his loyal companion. Sam whined again, his body trembling. It was a sound that cut through the silence, a stark contrast to the stillness around them. Daniel's heart ached for his friend, but he knew they couldn't turn back now. They had come too far, and there was no other choice but to press on. He refused to move, his gaze fixed on something in the shadows ahead. A twig snapped, the sound sharp and sudden in the quiet. Daniel's breath caught in his throat, his grip tightening on the knife. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he stood his ground, determined to face whatever was out there. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs, each beat a reminder of his own vulnerability. He had faced danger before, but this was different. This was an unknown threat, something that lurked in the darkness, unseen and unheard until it was too late. He strained to hear, to see, anything in the oppressive darkness. His senses were on high alert, every sound amplified, every shadow a potential threat. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees towering above like silent sentinels. The forest held its breath, a suffocating silence pressing down on him. Then he heard it. A whisper, faint and chilling, carried on the breeze. It wasn't the wind, it was something else, something that sent a shiver down his spine. The sound was almost human, but not quite. It was a voice, but distorted, as if coming from a great distance. A whisper, faint and chilling, carried on the breeze. It wasn't the wind. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a haunting melody that echoed through the trees. Daniel's mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was it a warning, a threat, or something else entirely? He didn't know, but he knew one thing for certain. They were not alone in the forest, and whatever was out there, it was watching them. Section 4. Eyes in the darkness. The hair on the back of Daniel's neck stood on end. "Let's go," he hissed, tugging on Sam's leash. The dog didn't budge. He stood frozen, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His eyes, reflecting the faint moonlight, were wide with terror. Daniel followed his gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Then slowly, 2 points of light flickered in the darkness far down the path. They weren't lanterns, he realized with a jolt of fear. They were eyes, eyes that watched him, cold and hungry. Section 5. Flight. Panic seized Daniel. He yanked on Sam's leash, breaking the dog free from his trance. "Run!" he shouted, his voice hoarse with terror. He didn't need to tell Sam twice. The dog bolted, racing down the path, his fear a tangible thing. Daniel sprinted after him, branches whipping at his face, the darkness a suffocating presence. He didn't dare slow down, didn't dare look back. The sound of their pursuer was a heavy panting in the stillness, getting closer with every desperate stride. Section 6. Face to Face. They burst into a small clearing, moonlight spilling onto the forest floor. The trees around them stood tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in the night breeze. The air was cool, and the scent of pine filled Daniel's lungs as he tried to catch his breath. Daniel stumbled to a halt, gasping for breath. His chest heaved with each desperate inhale, his legs trembling from the exertion of their frantic escape. He could feel the sweat trickling down his back, mixing with the cold night air to send shivers down his spine. He spun around, searching for their pursuer. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig sending jolts of fear through his body. The darkness seemed to close in around him, the once familiar forest now a maze of terror. The woods were silent, the only sound the frantic beating of his own heart. Then he saw it. A chill ran down his spine as his eyes locked onto the figure standing at the edge of the trees. It was as if the very shadows had come to life, taking form and substance. Standing at the edge of the trees, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure. It was tall and menacing, its form barely distinguishable from the darkness that surrounded it. The figure seemed to blend seamlessly with the night, an embodiment of fear itself. Tall and skeletal, it seemed to be made of darkness itself. Its limbs were long and thin, almost spider-like, and it moved with an unnatural grace. The very sight of it sent waves of dread crashing over Daniel, his mind struggling to comprehend the horror before him. Its eyes, burning with an unholy light, were fixed on Daniel. They glowed with a malevolent intensity, piercing through the darkness and into his very soul. It was as if the creature could see every fear, every doubt, every weakness that lay hidden within him. He felt a terror so profound it threatened to consume him. His legs felt like lead, his body frozen in place as the figure began to move towards him. Each step it took seemed to echo in the silence, a harbinger of doom. Daniel's mind screamed at him to run, but his body refused to obey. He was trapped, face to face with the embodiment of his worst nightmares. Section 7. Sanctuary. A low growl ripped from Sam's throat. The air was thick with tension. Every muscle in Sam's body coiled like a spring ready to snap. His eyes locked onto the shadowy figure emerging from the underbrush, a menacing presence that seemed to absorb the light around it. He launched himself at the figure, teeth bared. The force of his leap was like a thunderbolt, a blur of fur and fury. Sam's jaws snapped shut with a ferocious clack, aiming to sink his teeth into the intruder's flesh. For a split second, the creature hesitated. It was enough. That moment of indecision was all Sam needed to gain the upper hand. The creature's hesitation betrayed a flicker of fear, a crack in its otherwise impenetrable facade. Daniel grabbed Sam's leash and ran. His heart pounded in his chest like a war drum, each beat a reminder of the peril they were escaping. He could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins, propelling him forward with a desperate urgency. They didn't stop running until they broke free of the trees, the forest a dark smudge against the horizon. The town lights in the distance were like beacons of hope, guiding them to safety. Each step away from the forest felt like shedding a layer of dread. Safe. They were safe. The realization washed over them like a soothing balm, easing the tension that had gripped their bodies. The night air was cool and refreshing, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the forest. Daniel sank to his knees, pulling Sam close. He buried his face in Sam's fur, drawing comfort from the dog's steady heartbeat. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered relief, a sanctuary in the truest sense. His body trembled with exhaustion and the lingering echo of fear. The adrenaline that had fueled their escape was now ebbing away, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. Every muscle ached, a testament to the ordeal they had just survived. He never wanted to see the inside of those woods again. The forest, once a place of adventure and mystery, had transformed into a realm of nightmares. The shadows seemed to whisper secrets, dark and terrible, that were best left unheard. He had looked into the face of true darkness, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that some things are best left undisturbed. The memory of the creature's eyes, cold and unfeeling, would haunt him for the rest of his days. In that moment, Daniel understood the fragility of their sanctuary and the thin line that separated safety from chaos.